Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Amir Nyberg. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor and CEO of UCLA's Technology Development Group. We are the campus hub for innovation and entrepreneurship. We launched LABEST Bioscience Conference, now part of the LABEST Week, to build a bridge between groundbreaking research at UCLA and the people who can bring our discoveries into life, entrepreneurs, investors, and industry leaders. As you just heard from the Chancellor, this year's conference comes at a pivotal time. Academic research is under stress, yet its role at driving scientific breakthroughs and societal benefit has never been more important. That's why today's themes, innovation, infrastructure, translation, and entrepreneurship matter so much. For the conversation, pitch sessions, and networking ahead, we hope to inspire new partnership and renew our shared commitment to advancing biotech for the benefit of all. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our second keynote speaker. Dr. Jonathan Epstein is the Dean of the Perelman School of Medicine and Executive Vice President of the University of Pennsylvania Health System. He's also a scientific founder of Capstan Therapeutics, a company pioneering therapies at the intersection of CAR-T and mRNA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Epstein to the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here today. Ari and Rebecca, very much appreciate being here. Chancellor Frank, I'm going to follow up on some of your comments, which I think were right on target, with which I wholly agree. As the Chancellor mentioned, we're entering an era where the compact between the federal government and academia is rapidly changing. And my belief is that it's not a temporary swing of the pendulum, but this is a fundamental change in how biomedical research is going to proceed in this country, and we need to get out in front of it if we're going to continue to be as productive as we have been in the past. I'll add that I may not be quite as optimistic as you were, having been brought up by folks who grew up in the Depression and survived the Holocaust. They taught me not to be quite so optimistic about world events. But as we heard, grants are being canceled. There's very likely to be a reduction in indirect costs that help to support all of our institutions in academia. There's a proposed 40% cut in the NIH budget. This morning, there was an article in the paper about the NSF budget being cut already this year by more than 50%. And in areas of education, in STEM education, by 80% this year, compared to the average of the last 10 years. It's not something that is going to happen in the future. It is happening right now. This morning, I got an email from a faculty member at Penn who yesterday had a paper published on midline glioma, a terrible tumor, especially in kids, in molecular cell, and 4 hours later got a note that his NIH grant had been canceled that supported that work. He had 4 more years left running on that grant. In addition to these funding challenges, we're facing also major challenges for our health systems. And in fact, these challenges may dwarf the challenges that we're facing for funding of laboratories. And for those of you who aren't, deeply involved in academic medicine, in almost all of our major academic medical centers, margins from the clinical mission are moved over to help to support the academic mission. Because even with the indirect costs that we get now, we still have to provide somewhere between 50 cents to $1 on every dollar of indirect costs that we get to keep the engine running. And without those margins on the clinical mission, there would be a hit on the other side of the street as well. And with some of the proposed legislation that affect pharmacy reimbursement, so-called 340B, site neutrality, which supports institutions that take care of Medicaid patients, and other Medicaid cuts, we're going to see very significant challenges in our healthcare budgets that we and others are already preparing for. And we're already seeing some healthcare institutions go out of business. in Philadelphia, a major healthcare institution called Crozier Health just closed last week, and that shifts patients to Penn and to other institutions. Here's just an indication of how funding from the NIH has changed so far this year compared to last year. Again, this isn't something that might happen, and it's not something that's only at targeted institutions like Harvard, where all their funding has now been cut off from the NIH, or Columbia, where $600 million have been cut, or Penn, where $175 million have been cut. It's really affecting all of the flow of money coming out of the federal government. So don't think you can escape it. None of us can right now, and we should band together to figure out how to respond to it. And I'll also point out on the right, this is particularly affecting our trainees. And the pipeline of new scientists in this country is being affected right now. Students in my laboratory don't see a future in certainly in academic research, and there aren't a whole lot of jobs in pharma or biotech either right now, as many of you know. So they're looking for other career opportunities. All of this, makes me scratch my head, because even if you didn't want to save patients' lives or didn't care about new cures, purely on an economic argument, the investments that have been made from the federal government in STEM research have paid off remarkably well. It's estimated that every dollar invested leads to $2.50 of economic impact. So this is going to have an economic impact on the country, not only short term, but probably even more significantly long term, since it takes 10 to 20 years for fundamental science to be turned into real products. And lest you think that pharma and biotech can make up the difference, I beg to differ. I think the data shows that almost every new drug has its origin in federally funded research. Now, we might be able to shift that and come up with new models, and I think we have to, but we shouldn't think that we could just wipe away the fundamental research that's taking place and drug production will continue at full steam. This chart shows on the left for, I think it's 86 drugs that are new targets that got FDA approval during this period, 2010 to 2019. The funding that led to it had a tail back almost 20 years that was funding the basic science that went into it. And on the right is 356 drugs that might have been follow-ons or targets that had already been identified, but new drugs. And even there's about a 10-year tail on funding that went into produce those drugs. And one of the misalignments that I think we have to address is that academia has traditionally had no trouble taking the long view. We're happy to do basic science without even knowing what drug it's going to produce down the road. And the private sector has generally needed a little more focus before they're willing to invest. And we're going to have to come to some alignment on that mismatch if we're going to find our way out of this. Now, despite the fact that the federal government has put more and more money into research over the years, and the budget has increased now to $48 billion at the NIH each year, the amount that higher education has contributed to the pie has actually increased quite significantly over the last 20, 30, 40 years. So that now academia adds another 25%. Much of it transfers from margins in health systems, philanthropy, and other sources. Why have these institutions had to put more and more money in? Don't those indirect costs cover all your necessary costs? No, they don't. And one reason why is that all of the requirements for regulations, policies, reporting have skyrocketed in the last number of years. All unfunded mandates. You have to keep all your data. You have to report how much time you're doing on everything. Clinical trials requirements have gone way up. And there may be a real argument to be made that we could be more operationally efficient if we identified the policies and regulations that were absolutely necessary and got rid of the ones that weren't. And one of the opportunities in this crisis, I think, is to identify those, back it up with data, and see if now's the time to strip them away and make life a little bit easier for us as we do our research. Obviously, many of those regulations and oversights are absolutely critical, and for patient safety and other worker safety. But I think it is a time where we need to look at this and to understand why it has skyrocketed so in recent years. If you take a look, just to make one more comment about indirect costs, because I get a lot of questions about it, and I don't think anybody understands it well, even our own faculty. They frequently say, please give me those indirect costs back from my laboratory. And I say, actually, I've got some fixed costs here I've got to take care of. But if you look nationally at the amount of direct costs over the years, you can see the years on the left, and the indirect costs, or F&A, awarded, over the years, it has remained remarkably constant. This is across the whole country, at about 28% of the total costs each year. Now, you hear different numbers. I think at UCLA, it's 57.5%, the number that's used. That's 57.5% of the direct costs, not of the total costs. And we don't get 57.5% on every grant. We only get it on some grants. Some grants pay no indirects or 10% indirects. So on average, I'm guessing your indirect, true recovery rate is 40%. I don't know that, but that's what it is at Penn. Our indirect rate quoted by the federal government is 62.5%. Sounds huge, but really on average it's 40% of direct costs. And if you express that as the percent of total costs, it's 30%. Exactly what the national average is. So it's really 30%. And I don't know, putting that into context, that's what many people recommend people should pay for their rent or their mortgage. It sort of makes sense. That's what you pay for the overhead of the buildings, for the security, for the housekeeping, for the debt that that's about what it is. But if they cut it to 15% has been recommended, institutions are going to face a sudden big hole to fill. It's about $200 million at Penn. I don't know what it is here, but it's going to be a big number. And so we're going to have to make major adjustments to affect that. And it's hard to shift to a new model for innovation and new partnerships when you're busy cutting things over on this side of the street. Part of the reason I'm a little worried about what we're facing. So I've been at Penn for almost 30 years. I've seen a transformation of what happens there. And I might be just slightly biased, but I think we are now among the very best in the world at translating early discoveries to be real FDA-approved drugs and therapies. And I want to just give you a sense of how I think that's happened. Really, 2 decades ago, there was another uproar in Congress about the fact that all this money they were putting into the NIH wasn't producing real results. And they called it the Valley of Death. This was published in Nature, and that term was used frequently. And at Penn, the leadership at the time made a concerted effort with institutional investments in infrastructure that would promote success in translation. We started something called the Institute for Translational Medicine and Therapeutics, an Office of Clinical Research to promote first-in-human clinical trials. We totally remade our tech transfer office, trying to make it easier. I think we all have a ways to go in that journey. And then an Institute for RNA Innovation, the Center for Cellular Immunotherapy, and others. But these structural investments, including $50 million for a GMP manufacturing facility and others, allowed our brilliant faculty to see their dreams come true. And a watershed moment was when we got FDA approval for CAR T therapy that Carl June and his team helped to develop it at Penn. And Emily Whitehead, shown here, was the first pediatric patient treated with CAR T cells for lethal leukemia at the time. She is actually just completed last week her sophomore year at Penn. She was treated at age 5 at Children's Hospital. And there's a movie made about her story that was shown at the Tribeca Film Festival and elsewhere. You can get it streaming online, called Of Medicine and Miracles, that even though I know the story very, very well, brought tears to my eyes when I saw it. And we're going to hear more about CAR T cells later in this meeting from another CAR T hero. But that success was watershed, not only because CAR T cells are so impactful, but because it gave so many other faculty the confidence that they could make breakthroughs also. Not only the faculty shown here for these major contributions, but maybe just as importantly or more importantly, the next generation of faculty who have grown up now to believe that their job isn't just to publish papers and get grants. They really think their job is to cure diseases and get FDA approval for their therapies that come out of their laboratory. And they're willing to do the hard work to make that happen. So I like to say that 4 of the 5 greatest discoveries of the last couple of decades had their origin in basic research at Penn, and some of them are shown here: the mRNA vaccines, immunotherapy for cancer, gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy and for curing blindness, and the fundamental work that went into the new Alzheimer's drugs. All occurred at Penn. That's 4 major ones. The 5th one, I would say, is CRISPR. We didn't discover CRISPR, but we were the first to use it in humans. And one of those up-and-coming faculty members who I mentioned is Kiran Musunuru, shown here. And you may have read in the newspaper just last week that Kiran was able to deliver prime editing, next-generation CRISPR, encoded by RNA in a lipid nanoparticle to correct an inherited metabolic defect in a urea cycle gene that a baby born at CHOP had inherited and would have killed that baby. And within 6 months from the time of diagnosis at birth, when they sequenced her genome, he was able to prove that his prime editing approach would work in cells, would work in a mouse model, was effective in non-human primates, was able to go to the FDA and get approval to deliver a bespoke N of 1 therapy to this baby. I think it's a Guinness Book of World Records record for going from target to FDA approval. And his confidence that he could do that, and the infrastructure that we have built over the years that allows him to do that, is what amazes me most about this really remarkable case. It was even in the Los Angeles Times, I'll point out, not just on the East Coast. So these are some of the FDA approvals. We've had about 41 FDA approvals since 2013 at Penn. It's now become almost routine. And I will say that first day of when Kymriah was approved, we had a flash mob in the lobby of the hospital, and everybody showed up: the president of the university, the people working in the labs. And when I walked out that day, I saw one of the guys valet parking the cars, and I said, "Exciting day." And he said, "Yeah, doc, every day I come to work, I feel like I'm helping to cure cancer." I think when you've got a culture like that, that's when things start to click. So these platform technologies really matter. I think for the future, we're investing in AI like everybody. The Penn Medicine Biobank, where we've consented almost every patient, or we asked for consent of almost every patient coming to Penn Medicine to take their leftover blood from many blood draws and bank them. And the consent allows us to call those patients back for follow-on studies. So we have now hundreds of thousands of patients with the ability to cull through for enrolling them in clinical trials based on genetics and other health system electronic medical record data. And a orthogonal approach with immune health, somewhat analogous to what I think you're trying to do here, where we're collecting samples and taking an immune fingerprint of patients to try to use that as an indicator of their exposures and their response to therapies, combined with AI to make predictions about their response to therapies and disease progression. So these platforms will be incredibly important for partnerships with the private sector, since we have patients and many in the private sector don't. We've also done a few other things to catalyze this culture. Something called the Dean's Innovation Fund is a philanthropic fund, which we use like a venture fund to fund early ideas that might not get funded by the NIH, even in good times. And this has been remarkably successful. You can see some of the stats along the bottom. Relatively small amounts of money invested have led to new companies, clinical trials, patent applications. This is an interesting model. We have a lot of very smart people, including Ari and others, who have contributed. But me and my colleagues make the decisions about who we're investing in, because we think we know the details of their science the best. And then the health system has put $50 million into a fund to help to support new spin-out companies in the region. And that has also been remarkably successful. We've invested about $40 million, And it's already led to $48 million in license-related royalties back to Penn and $260 million in sponsored research agreements funded by other venture funding to those companies that then funds sponsored research back at the university. So this has been catalytic in the region, helping to support new companies. Here are some of those companies that have been supported. You may recognize some of them. I want to just close with some comments about what I see on the horizon for new models for partnerships. First, right now, the method that we use to partner is really clumsy. We negotiate every license and every agreement as one-offs, which is slow as could be and frustrating to both parties. Faculty hate it, companies hate it, lawyers might like it, but also, we usually do studies in academia, and then when we do license them to biotech or pharma, they have to repeat those studies to see if they're reproducible and to do those studies in an IND-enabling way, which we're not used to doing in the academy. And then they come back sometimes to academia for first-in-human trials, which means there's more negotiations at that step. And access to patients, genetics, EMR data, imaging data, immune profiling data, is cumbersome, especially at scale, especially across institutions. We accelerate the pipeline through enhanced integration from the earliest stages of discovery. Our consortia of funders, since the NIH seems to be backing off, venture, sovereign funds, state money, is that viable? Can we simplify negotiations with more umbrella agreements? I think we have to. And could Company X come to Penn or UCLA and license an entire platform under one agreement and work in partnership, maybe in shared space, maybe with shared staff? We at one time had 200 Novartis employees in our buildings when we were first developing CAR T cells. Can't we be a little more open-minded about how we partner? And if we do that, there are real questions about academic freedom and freedom to operate that we'll need to work out. Can we create facile clinical trial networks with one point of entry, one IRB, and access to that data that I was talking about? Companies are going to China, to Australia, to New Zealand to do their studies. We need to reinvent how we do large-scale clinical trials here. So I'll stop there. I'm 50 seconds over time. Thank you for your attention.